The door was locked, but something was scratching, desperately, on the other side. When Maeve opened it, she didn't find a thief. Or a stranger. She found a German shepherd, bleeding, shivering, shielding two newborn pups with her own broken body. Why was she there? Who did this to her? And why? Did the dog refuse to let Maeve touch her, but never left her porch for days? What Maeve chose to do next would uncover a secret that someone was willing to kill to protect. Watch till the end. This story doesn't just break your heart, it rebuilds it. The snow had started falling just after dusk. Thick, wet flakes spiraling through the streetlights like torn paper from a forgotten sky. Inside a modest two-story house at the corner of East Willow Lane, Maeve Langley sat on the edge of her worn beige sofa. Her legs tucked beneath a heavy wool blanket, a book resting open but unread in her lap. The house was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of the radiator and the occasional creak from the old pine floorboards. Outside, the storm crept steadily, blanketing the city of Greenport in silence. Maeve hadn't noticed the storm's shift, nor the way the wind had begun to howl low, as if calling someone home. Maeve was 38, a woman of quiet sorrow and quiet strength. Her auburn hair, once vibrant and cascading down her back in waves, was now tied in a haphazard bun, streaked with silver she didn't bother to hide. Her skin bore the pale translucence of someone who no longer greeted the sun often, and her green eyes, once bright and full of curiosity, had settled into a kind of permanent reflection, as though every glance backwards held something more precious than the present. A few years earlier, a car crash had taken her husband, and with him, their unborn child. Since then, Maeve had become a ghost inside her own life, drifting through the days without reason, speaking only when necessary, and always avoiding the room upstairs that once held baby clothes and paint swatches she had picked out with such trembling hope. It was close to midnight when the sound came, not a knock exactly, but a soft scratching, barely audible over the wind. She paused, book slipping from her fingers. The sound came again. Maeve's heart began to thump, a sound foreign and unwelcome in the stillness she'd carefully built around herself. Pulling the blanket tighter, she stepped quietly toward the front door. Her boots weren't on. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for the knob. She glanced through the peephole. Nothing. Then, another sound, clearer now, a whimper. Frowning, she flipped on the porch light. What she saw made her freeze. There, huddled against the base of the door, was a German shepherd. Its ribs showed clearly beneath patchy fur clumped with snow and dirt. Her eyes, large, amber, and too still, were focused on Maeve through the glass with a kind of pleading dignity. Pressed tightly beneath her were two tiny creatures, barely moving. Puppies. Their bodies trembled under the thin cover of their mother's flank. One lifted its head weakly and let out the smallest cry Maeve had ever heard. Her hand hovered over the knob. She hadn't touched another living soul in weeks. She hadn't allowed herself to feel, to open the floodgates of connection, because once opened, grief always found a way through. Yet the sight before her bypassed every wall she'd constructed. This wasn't about her. These animals, this dog, weren't asking. They were simply surviving. Barely. After a long moment, Maeve opened the door. Cold burst in like a wave, and the mother dog flinched but didn't move. Maeve crouched slowly, her voice rough from disuse. "Come on, girl, let me help." The dog's ears twitched. One pup whimpered again. With great effort, the dog rose unsteadily and nudged the smaller pup forward with her nose. Its tiny legs skittered uselessly against the frozen porch. Without hesitation, the mother picked it up gently by the scruff and stepped inside. Maeve moved back as she passed, setting the pup down softly near the radiator. The second followed clumsily, and together they collapsed into a heap, steam rising faintly from their bodies as they hit the warmth. Maeve stood motionless, the door still open behind her. Snow blew in, clinging to her socks. Finally, she closed it. She turned, and for the first time in years, her body acted before her mind could argue. She fetched towels, laid them by the radiator, fetched a blanket from the closet, and gently draped it over the mother's thin frame. The dog stiffened, then sighed, a long, shuddering release, as if for the first time she could stop holding the world on her shoulders. Maeve didn't speak. She simply sat beside them, her hand resting near the pup's twitching tail, not touching, just close enough to feel the breath of life return to the room. The moment was broken by a knock, this time unmistakably human. She blinked, confused, and stood. When she opened the door, a young man stood on the stoop holding a package, now damp with snow. He looked surprised to see her. "Hi, I think I gave you the wrong delivery earlier today," he said, brushing snow from his dark curly hair. He had a messenger bag slung across one shoulder and wore a bright orange scarf that clashed terribly with his navy coat. Maeve recognized him vaguely. He'd delivered packages to the neighborhood for the past few months. He was tall, with olive-toned skin and a warm, almost apologetic smile. "Sorry to bother you this late," he added. "Name's Liam Alvarez." Maeve opened her mouth to respond, but before words came out, a soft yip echoed from behind her. Liam's gaze shifted past her shoulder. "Whoa," he said. "Are those puppies?" She turned, startled to realize she hadn't even thought to hide them. One of the pups had wriggled free from the blanket and was now attempting to crawl toward her. She stooped instinctively, lifting it with both hands. "I found them," she said finally, her voice rusty, unused. "Just now." Liam's face softened, and something flickered in his expression, gentleness, maybe even awe. "Lucky pups," he said. Maeve glanced down at the tiny creature in her arms, its eyes still closed, its breath light and quick. The pup stirred and let out a small sneeze. Maeve smiled without thinking. It wasn't wide or bright, but it was real. And Liam noticed. "First time I've seen you smile," he said, not unkindly. "Looks good on you." Maeve looked up, surprised. She opened her mouth to respond, but hesitated. Then, quietly, "Thanks." He nodded, sensing her limits. "I'll come by tomorrow. If you need anything, for them, I mean." And with that, he turned and disappeared into the snowy dark. Maeve closed the door slowly, the warmth inside meeting her skin like a promise. She looked at the dog now curled tightly around her pups, their tiny bodies rising and falling beneath the blanket. The mother watched her too, no longer afraid, just tired, hopeful, perhaps. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know what this meant or where it would lead. But she had opened the door, and for tonight, that was enough. Morning came with a faint orange blush through the frost-covered windows, diffusing light softly across Maeve Langley's living room. The scent of old wool, melted snow, and something faintly animal hung in the air. Freya lay curled beneath the bay window, her two pups nestled close to her side, their tiny bodies twitching in sleep. Maeve sat across from them on the floor, her back against the arm of the couch, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside her. Her eyes were fixed on Freya, trying to read the silent, primal language written in every flick of the dog's ear, every wary glance. Freya still didn't trust her, not entirely, but something had shifted overnight. Where once there had been fear, now there was a tentative awareness. Not acceptance, not yet. But Maeve could feel it, like the first crack of ice on a frozen pond, the first movement before thaw. The pups had survived the night, though they were still frighteningly fragile. Their tiny limbs were thin as twigs, their fur sparse and slightly damp from where Freya licked them clean. Maeve had placed soft towels around them and filled a small ceramic dish with lukewarm water, which Freya had sniffed before lapping slowly, her muscles still taut with caution. Maeve knew she couldn't do this alone. She needed help. Reaching for her phone, she scrolled through local listings and found a mobile vet service she vaguely remembered hearing about. Her fingers hovered over the call button, hesitating. An old reflex, but she pressed it. The woman who answered sounded brisk, competent. "This is Dr. Sarah Patel," she said, her voice clipped but not unkind. "You've reached the Lakeside Mobile Clinic." Maeve explained the situation as concisely as she could. A stray dog, 2 newborn pups, possible malnutrition, exposure to the cold. Dr. Patel agreed to come by later that morning. At exactly 10:03, a faded teal van pulled up in front of Maeve's home. Sarah stepped out with a satchel slung across her shoulder, her short salt and pepper hair tucked under a gray beanie, glasses perched low on her nose. She was tall and slender, with the wiry energy of someone who had been on her feet her entire adult life. A faded burn scar stretched down the left side of her neck, just barely visible beneath her collar. She greeted Maeve with a curt nod. "You're the one who called about the shepherd?" "Yes, she's inside," Maeve said, stepping aside. Sarah walked in without fuss. Her eyes swept over the room. took in the mother dog and the pups in one measured glance, and she crouched. "Hey there, Mama," she murmured. "I'm not going to hurt you." Freya growled low in her throat, a soft warning. Her ears were pinned back, body tense. "She's protective," Maeve offered. "Hasn't tried to bite, just guards them." "Good sign," Sarah replied, adjusting her stance to seem smaller. "Means she's got fight in her." Over the next 15 minutes, Sarah worked with calm, practiced hands. She didn't try to touch Freya at first, only observed, took notes on her condition, asked Maeve a few quiet questions. Eventually, Freya allowed a brief examination. Cracked paw pads, severe weight loss, no visible infections. The pups were underweight but stable. "She's been through hell," Sarah said softly, rising to her full height, "and she's still doing everything right." Maeve folded her arms, watching Freya nudge the smallest pup closer to her belly. "I don't know where she came from. She just showed up." "Sometimes they do," Sarah said, eyes scanning Maeve now with a similar quiet assessment. "Sometimes the ones who've been abandoned know exactly where to go." Maeve didn't respond. As Sarah packed her bag, she handed over a small bundle of antibiotic ointment, vitamin supplements for the pups, and a canister of high-calorie wet food. "I'll come back tomorrow. Try to keep them warm. If she lets you, you can gently clean her fur with a damp cloth, but don't force it." She paused at the door, then added, "You did a good thing, Maeve." Maeve nodded, still processing the weight of what she had taken on. "Thanks." That afternoon, the snow returned, lighter this time, swirling like feathers through the quiet streets. Maeve had just finished setting up a fresh blanket near the radiator when the doorbell rang again. She opened it to find Liam standing there with a paper bag from the local pet store. He grinned sheepishly. "Did some reading, thought I'd drop off a few things. Puppy milk replacer, a heat pad, also some treats for the mama in case she's bribable." Maeve couldn't help but smile. "You didn't have to." "I know, I wanted to." Liam stepped inside and crouched carefully near the door, giving Freya plenty of space. She lifted her head, ears perked, but didn't growl. She watched him with the same wary curiosity she had given Maeve the night before. "She's beautiful," Liam said quietly. "She's strong," Maeve replied, her voice thoughtful. "She hasn't let go of them for a second." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the pups twitch and squirm in sleep. Liam broke the quiet first. "My cousin raised shepherds, said they'll die before they let anyone hurt their pack." Maeve glanced at him. "Sounds about right." Before he left, Liam handed Maeve a slip of paper. "My number, in case you need anything. Or if she, I don't know, starts barking in Morse code." Maeve chuckled. "I'll let you know." As the door clicked shut behind him, Maeve turned back to Freya. The dog had her head resting between her front paws now, eyes half closed but still alert. Maeve knelt nearby, slowly reaching out. Her hand hovered just inches above the dog's shoulder. Freya didn't move away. Not quite permission, but no rejection either. That night, as Maeve lay on the couch under a fleece blanket, the pups let out soft, rhythmic cries in their sleep. Freya stirred, curling her body tighter around them. Maeve watched her from the dim halo of the lamp, her heart full of something unnamed. For the first time in a long time, the silence in her house didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like protection, like presence, like a beginning. And as the wind whispered against the windows and the snow layered gently outside, neither woman nor dog slept deeply. But both, in their own way, began to rest. The wind had died down, but the sky still carried the pale weight of snow. By the third morning, Maeve no longer startled when she heard the tiny squeaks and soft grunts of the pups wriggling against their mother's belly. The sounds had become a rhythm she welcomed, one that filled the long, quiet silences she'd once dreaded. Freya was still cautious, still watchful, but something had changed. She no longer flinched when Maeve walked past, and when Maeve gently slid a bowl of warm food toward her, Freya didn't wait for her to step away before eating. The shift was subtle, but steady, an offering of trust, inch by inch. Maeve found herself lingering more often on the floor, leaning back against the couch as the pups tumbled clumsily over each other. She'd named them 2 days earlier without fanfare: Pico, the smaller one with a streak of white on his chest, and Ember, the livelier of the two, with a bark far too loud for her tiny frame. Freya had responded to the names, tilting her head when Maeve whispered them aloud, her ears twitching as though she were tucking the sounds away. That morning, as Maeve folded the last of the fresh towels she'd set out near the radiator, she found herself staring down the hallway at the door to the small bedroom she hadn't opened in nearly 3 years. It was a narrow white door with a brass knob that had dulled from disuse. The hinges creaked when she reached out and turned it. The air inside the room was still and cool, carrying the faint scent of lavender and old cotton. Inside, time had stopped. A mobile of tiny paper stars still hung above the crib, unmoving. The walls were a soft sea glass green, the kind she'd picked out after hours spent debating in paint aisles. There were picture books lined neatly on the shelf, untouched. A tiny knitted cap still sat folded on the rocking chair's arm, something she'd bought on a whim at a fall craft fair, back when hope had still felt safe. Maeve didn't cry. She simply stood there, absorbing the silence of what could have been. Then, slowly, she began to move. She opened the windows, she stripped the bedding and folded it away. She boxed the books, the clothes, the keepsakes, carefully, reverently, as if each item still held a heartbeat. She didn't know exactly what she was doing, only that she could no longer bear for the room to remain frozen in time while the rest of the house came alive again. It took her hours, and when she was done, she didn't leave the room. Instead, she brought in a worn rug, a thick floor cushion, and the puppy's makeshift bedding. She cleaned the floors, wiped the baseboards, and opened the closet to store Freya's food, the medical supplies Dr. Patel had left, and a basket of towels Liam had dropped off the day before. When Maeve finally stepped back, the room no longer looked like a shrine to grief. It looked lived in. Bare, perhaps, but warm. Freya had followed her to the doorway, watching silently. Maeve knelt and patted the cushion. "Come on, girl. Let's try this." Freya hesitated, then stepped inside, her nails clicking against the hardwood. She sniffed the corner, then padded toward the cushion and circled twice before lying down, her pups crawling blindly across the soft bedding. Maeve exhaled slowly. She hadn't expected to feel lighter. That afternoon, as she made tea in the kitchen, the doorbell rang. She opened it to find Liam holding a large box under one arm, snow caught in his dark lashes. He wore the same orange scarf, now a little frayed at the edges. "Thought I'd bring some actual dog bowls," he said, "and a toy. It squeaks, which is either adorable or deeply regrettable. I'll let you decide." Maeve smiled. "You're making a habit of this." "I like habits," he said, stepping inside. "Some of them, anyway." As she poured 2 mugs of tea, he wandered to the entryway table, where a small pile of unopened mail sat beside a dusty wooden tray. Something caught his eye, a yellowed envelope tucked inside the pages of an old book. He slipped it out, then hesitated. "Hey, is this yours?" he asked, holding it up. Maeve took it, frowning. The handwriting was vaguely familiar, loopy, adolescent, full of misspelled hope. She opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a letter from one of her students, written nearly a decade ago. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did," it began. "You told me my stories were worth something. Now, I'm in college for journalism." Maeve swallowed hard. She'd forgotten about the letter. She'd forgotten how it had made her feel the day she received it, like she had left a mark that mattered. Her hand trembled slightly as she folded it back. "I didn't know you were a teacher," Liam said quietly. "English," Maeve replied. "Middle school. I stopped after the accident." He didn't ask which one. He didn't have to. "You were probably someone's favorite," he said, sipping his tea. "You still are." She said nothing, but her eyes misted as she watched Freya through the open door. The dog had risen to stand between her pups and the doorway, her body low and tense. Liam followed her gaze. "She's been doing that more," Maeve said softly, "standing in front of me, between me and the window, between me and the door." "She's protecting you," Liam said. Maeve nodded. I think she knows I needed it." Freya relaxed when she saw Liam wasn't a threat and settled back down, one eye half open. The sun had started to dip behind the clouds, casting long golden lines across the floor of the repurposed nursery. Later, as Liam left, Maeve stood at the front door a while longer than usual. The street was quiet, the snow muffling every sound, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Not entirely. Back inside, Freya stirred when Maeve entered the room. She lifted her head, tail thumping softly against the rug. Maeve sat beside her, letting her fingers brush gently against Freya's thickening fur. The pups suckled lazily, their eyes still closed, but their bodies stronger now. The room, once a space filled only with loss, now echoed with breath and warmth and a quiet kind of rebirth. Maeve didn't know what came next, but she knew she'd open the door, and now she was ready to walk through it. The wind had changed. Maeve noticed it first in the way the trees outside leaned slightly differently, the way the house seemed to breathe with tension even when it was silent. It was subtle, like a shift in barometric pressure, an omen that hung low and invisible. Freya noticed it too. She'd begun sleeping closer to the front door, her ears flicking with every noise beyond the walls. Her body stretched protectively across the hallway, as if placing herself between Maeve and the world outside. That evening, Maeve sat curled in the armchair by the front window, a worn fleece blanket over her legs, a mug of chamomile tea cooling in her hands. She tried to read but couldn't focus. The words blurred on the page. Pico and Ember had finally settled after a boisterous afternoon of tumbling over each other and trying to chew everything from Liam's forgotten shoelace to the hem of Maeve's cardigan. They were growing fast. Ember, always the louder of the two, had begun to bark at shadows, while Pico remained quieter, observing everything with his wide, solemn eyes. Freya lay by the door, motionless but not relaxed. Her ears were up, her breath steady. Maeve could feel the tension in her even without looking directly at her. It was like Freya had become the house's second lock. The sun had long since dipped behind the frozen rooftops of Greenport when it happened. Freya's head snapped up. A guttural growl rumbled low in her throat. Maeve looked up from her book, heart skipping. Freya stood. Her body stiffened, tail low and still. Then came the bark. Deep, feral, more like a warning shot than a sound. Maeve rushed to the window, heart pounding. Outside, under the dim street lamp at the edge of her fence, stood a figure. Tall, still, wrapped in a heavy black coat, hood drawn, face indistinct in the darkness. Maeve's breath caught in her throat. The figure made no move toward the house, just stood there, unmoving, like a statue half swallowed by the snow. Freya growled again, louder this time. Maeve's hand hovered near her phone, unsure whether to call the police or simply wait, frozen like prey beneath a predator's gaze. But then, in an instant, the figure turned and disappeared into the trees beyond the road, swallowed by the dark. Maeve didn't sleep that night. Neither did Freya. The dog stood guard near the window until morning, her body taut with a kind of memory Maeve could not reach. Miles away, across town, Ethan Rowe leaned against the hood of his Navy sedan, his eyes locked on the flickering screen of a tablet. He was in his mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a blunt-cut jaw and short black hair peppered with premature gray at the temples. His face bore the quiet fatigue of someone who had spent years chasing ghosts and never quite catching them. There was a long scar on his right hand, old, jagged, from a knife fight with a suspect 5 years ago. He wore a weatherproof parka zipped to the collar, one hand shoved deep into a pocket, the other scrolling through forum posts. The photo had been small, blurry, likely taken with a phone. Freya curled up beside a fireplace, one puppy draped over her back. It had been posted to a private forum for retired K-9 handlers by someone anonymous, captioned only with, "She found us." Ethan had nearly dropped his coffee when he saw it. He knew that face. That dog. Delta K-29, last seen 3 years ago during a botched raid on an illegal breeding facility outside Bridgeport. There had been a fire, supposedly accidental, but 5 dogs had gone missing, including Delta. Official records said she'd perished. Ethan had never believed it. He cross-referenced the forum's metadata, tracked the IP address to a residential area in Greenport. Then he'd found Liam's public delivery logs, small-time courier, friendly reputation, and noted a spike in drop-offs to a woman named Maeve Langley, single, quiet, recently ordered pet supplies. It all fit. Too well. Ethan wasn't just a detective. He worked undercover for the Department of Animal Welfare Intelligence, a rarely discussed branch that tracked illegal K-9 exploitation rings. Dogs used for courier crime, underground fighting, or worse. His last partner had been shot on a sting gone wrong. Ethan hadn't trusted anyone since. He slid his phone from his pocket and opened a folder labeled Langley. New entry. Unidentified figure seen outside residence. Possible surveillance. He made a mental note to drive past her house tonight. Not intervene. Not yet. Watch. Wait. If Delta was there, and if someone was looking for her, they were already too close. Back at Maeve's home, the morning brought little relief. Freya remained tense, her movements tight and measured, her eyes constantly drifting toward the door. Maeve called Dr. Patel, asking whether a dog could remember trauma the same way people did. More than we think, Sarah said on speakerphone, her voice crackling through static. They don't forget faces, or smells, or fear. Maeve said nothing for a long time. Then, she didn't bark until she saw him, not once, all night. That tells you everything you need to know, Sarah replied. Don't leave her alone. Later that afternoon, Liam arrived with more supplies. A second bed for the pups, a chew ring shaped like a giraffe, and a flashlight for Maeve, just in case. He looked concerned when she told him about the man at the gate. You want me to come by at night? He offered, rubbing the back of his neck. I can walk my route past here, say every other hour. I won't hover, just check in. Maeve hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. Freya didn't bark when Liam entered. She stood between him and Maeve, her posture guarded but calm. Her eyes never left him. You're not just guarding the puppies anymore, are you, girl? Liam said, crouching slowly. You're guarding her, too. Freya blinked. For a moment, Maeve could almost see understanding pass between them. That night, Maeve double-checked every lock, every window. She placed her father's old flashlight on the table beside the couch. Freya lay in the hallway again, closer to Maeve's bedroom door this time. The pups were sound asleep, bellies full, noses twitching in dreams. The snow had started again, fine and slow like sifted sugar. Maeve didn't know who the man was, or why Freya reacted to him like she had, but she knew this. Something had followed Freya to her doorstep, and whatever it wasn't done yet. She turned off the light and settled beneath her blankets, eyes open in the dark. Freya didn't sleep, and somewhere down the street, parked just beyond the bend where the porch light couldn't reach, a Navy sedan sat idle, engine off, headlights dim. Inside, Ethan Rowe watched and waited. Chapter 5. The Torn Photograph. The morning sunlight spilled through the nursery window in soft golden slants, warming the edge of the blanket where Freya lay curled around Pico and Ember. Maeve sat nearby, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her coffee mug, her thoughts scattered. The snow from the night before had hardened into a crusty sheen across the sidewalks, and the distant rumble of a snowplow was the only sound breaking the stillness. Freya stirred, lifting her head slightly, and Maeve caught sight of something she hadn't noticed before. A faint line just above Freya's rear leg, nearly hidden beneath the thick fur. She leaned in slowly, careful not to startle her. Freya didn't flinch. Her eyes followed Maeve's movement with quiet trust. Maeve gently parted the fur and examined the mark. It wasn't just a scar, it was deliberate. A thin, symmetrical line followed by a small raised bump beneath the skin. Not from an injury, but a procedure. Maeve's heart tightened. It was too clean, too precise. Later that afternoon, while Freya and the pups napped, Maeve went to her study and pulled out her old laptop. It had gathered dust and required 2 restarts before the screen flickered to life. She hadn't used it in over a year. Opening a search engine, she typed in keywords: German Shepherd, scar, K9, training mark. What she found chilled her. Certain tactical dogs, especially those trained for special ops or high-risk law enforcement work, were sometimes marked discreetly during early training phases for internal tracking. But these marks were often erased from records when dogs were retired or stolen. Maeve hesitated before typing the next query. K, 9 dogs missing, illegal training programs, Northeast. One article stood out. Old, archived, and barely indexed. It detailed a fire at a private training facility 3 years ago outside Bridgeport. 5 dogs had vanished in the chaos, presumed dead. One of them was identified as Delta K29, a German Shepherd noted for her intelligence and strong maternal instincts, known for bonding quickly and protecting fiercely. There was no photo attached, but the description felt like a blueprint of Freya. Maeve's hand trembled slightly as she clicked over to a small private forum linked at the bottom of the article. Retired K-9 Handlers of America. Most of the posts were mundane. Stories of beloved dogs lost to old age, shared memories from deployments, dog care advice. But something told her this was where she needed to be. She created an anonymous account and uploaded a recent picture she'd taken of Freya lying beside the fireplace. Pico's tiny paw draped over her nose. She captioned it simply, "She showed up on my doorstep. Anyone recognize her?" Within 20 minutes, her inbox pinged. In a small field office above a used bookstore in downtown Hartford, Ethan Rowe leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the screen in front of him. He had just returned from a morning briefing with his supervisor, who still believed Delta K-29 had perished in the Bridgeport fire. Ethan never accepted it. There had been too many unanswered questions, too many red flags in the transfer logs. He rubbed his temples and clicked on the link that had just appeared in the K-9 Handler forum. The photo was low resolution, but Ethan's chest tightened at the sight. The angle was different, the fur more weathered. But he'd know that posture anywhere. Head low, back arched protectively, and the telltale softness in her expression when surrounded by the young. That was Delta. His voice was steady as he picked up his phone and called a number saved under Courier, Greenport. Liam answered on the third ring. "Rowe?" "I need a favor," Ethan said. "That woman you've been delivering to, Maeve Langley, you said she had a shepherd with pups?" "Yeah, Freya. Why?" "I need to talk to her, and I need you to be the one who sets it up." There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. "This something bad?" "I'm not sure yet, but I think someone's coming for that dog, and not to thank her." Liam arrived at Maeve's place just before dusk. He brought a small bag of dog biscuits and a sheepish grin. "I figured I owed Ember an apology for the whole slipper-stealing incident." Maeve laughed softly and opened the door. Inside, Freya eyed him, but didn't growl. "Progress." They sat near the fireplace, where the pups dozed in a tangle of limbs. Maeve hesitated, then showed Liam the picture she had posted. "This is what started it," she said. "After I saw the scar, I just needed to know." Liam's brow furrowed. "You're right to be cautious. There's something else." He paused. "I have a friend, Ethan. He works in law enforcement, kind of the behind-the-curtain kind. He's been following cases like this for years. He thinks Freya might be more than just a stray." Maeve's gaze darkened. "What does that mean?" "It means," Liam said slowly, "she may have seen things someone doesn't want remembered." As they spoke, Freya shifted. Maeve noticed a strange glint under her fur, the same spot as the scar. With gentle fingers, she parted the fur again and felt the small lump beneath. "I think there's something in her," she said. "Not just a scar. Something implanted." Liam stood. "Like a chip?" "Maybe, but not the kind they scan at a shelter." They decided to call Dr. Patel. She arrived an hour later, wearing a navy fleece jacket and a knitted red scarf. Her cheeks were wind-chapped, and her dark eyes were tired but focused. She examined Freya with practiced hands, her fingers tracing the scarred area. "This isn't a typical chip," she said finally. "I'd need a proper reader, but if I had to guess, this was a tracking or data chip. Military grade." Maeve's breath caught. "Data?" "It's possible," Sarah replied. "They used to embed encrypted tags in working dogs, identification, location logs, sometimes even surveillance audio. Most were wiped after retirement." "And if she wasn't retired?" Liam asked. "Then someone may still be looking for what she remembers," Sarah said grimly. Ethan's car was already parked near the end of the block that night, headlights off. He watched as Dr. Patel emerged from Maeve's front steps and drove away. 10 minutes later, Maeve stepped onto the porch and looked out over the neighborhood, arms crossed against the cold. In her arms, she held a sleeping Pico, his tiny face nestled against her collarbone. She didn't see Ethan, but he saw her. And as he watched, his phone vibrated. A new message appeared from an encrypted server. "Asset K-29 active, potential civilian breach, sweep requested." His blood turned cold. They had found her. He started the engine. Everything was about to change. It was a cold Wednesday morning when Maeve saw him for the first time, standing beneath the elm tree just beyond her front walk. a figure half swallowed by mist and shadow, like he belonged to the air more than the ground. She was on her porch, bundled in a thick gray coat, holding Ember close against her chest. The pup's legs dangled limply, head nestled into the crook of her elbow, fast asleep and trusting. Maeve had only stepped out for a breath of fresh air, a moment of silence before the day began. But the silence that greeted her was not hers alone. The man didn't wave, didn't speak. He simply stood there, one boot slightly forward, arms loose at his sides. His coat was long, weathered black canvas with frayed cuffs and a broken zipper. A knit cap was pulled low over thinning brown hair, and his jaw was covered in uneven stubble. He looked to be in his mid-40s, tall and wiry, with skin that had spent years exposed to cold and sun, bearing the red undertones of a life lived outdoors or in flight. But it was his eyes that struck Maeve, sharp, gray, and hard, eyes that had seen cruelty and learned to mimic it. Maeve tensed, clutching Ember tighter. Freya was already at the door behind her, her stance rigid, tail low, ears flattened. When the man took one slow step forward onto the sidewalk, Freya let out a growl so guttural Maeve felt it in her spine. It was deeper than warning, something ancestral, protective, primal. The man raised both hands. "Easy now," he said, his voice calm, a rasp laced with dry familiarity. "I just came to get my dog." Maeve blinked. "Excuse me?" "She's mine," he said, nodding toward Freya. "Name's Roxy. Had her since she was a pup. Ran off 2 winters ago during a job. Been looking for her ever since." Freya's growling didn't stop. It deepened, chest rumbling like distant thunder. Her eyes were locked on him, pupils blown wide, body slightly crouched. Not out of fear, but ready to strike. Maeve shook her head, her voice firm despite the chill creeping down her back. "She's not yours." "I've got papers," the man said, reaching slowly into the pocket of his coat. Freya lunged against the doorframe, barking with such force Maeve staggered back, heart hammering. The man didn't flinch. He pulled out a crumpled manila envelope, holding it up like proof. "She was trained for tactical retrieval," he said. "Delta K-29, that's her serial. I got the original collar tags and logbooks. I know what she is. And she don't belong in some lady's living room with squeaky toys and puppies." Maeve's voice sharpened. "Leave." "You don't understand what you've got in that dog," he said, voice tightening. "She's got value, history. She's not a possession. She's not safe." Freya's barking intensified, sharp and relentless, like an alarm triggered by memory. Her stance had shifted now. She was in front of Maeve, fully between them, teeth bared. Maeve could see the trembling in her limbs, the twitch in her jaw. Without turning, she reached behind her and picked up the phone from the porch table. "I'm calling the police," she said flatly. The man narrowed his eyes. "You don't want to do that." But Maeve was already dialing. 911, what's your emergency?" "There's a man outside my home," she said, voice steady. "He claims ownership of my dog. He won't leave." By the time the dispatcher responded, Maeve looked back up, and the man was gone. She stepped off the porch carefully, but the sidewalk was empty. No footprints in the melting snow, no manila envelope left behind. Just the stillness of the cold air and the echo of Freya's breath. Panting, raw. Inside, Maeve closed the door and locked it. Freya collapsed onto the rug, legs shaking, tongue lolling as she fought to settle herself. Maeve knelt and rested a hand on the back of her neck. Freya didn't move away. That night, Maeve called Liam, told him everything. He was silent for a long time before saying, "I'll tell Ethan." Ethan Rowe was in a parking lot off Camden Street when he got the message. The moment Liam described the man, lean build, jagged jaw, gravel voice, Ethan's stomach dropped. He knew who that was. Martin Kane, former private handler turned illicit trainer. Ex-military discharge for unauthorized operations. He'd once run a side business reprogramming tactical dogs, selling them to whoever paid most. Cartels, rogue security firms, corporate espionage teams. Kane's name had come up during the Bridgeport fire inquiry. He'd disappeared 6 months later. There had been whispers of bounty recovery teams, even assassins for hire trained with the dogs like Delta K-29, but no hard evidence, until now. Ethan pulled up the digital case folder, snapping open the last known photo of Kane, taken from a DMV file 5 years out of date. He looked older now, more ragged, but the shape of his frame was the same, the posture, the arrogance. He called a contact at the regional FBI field office. "Need to reflag a fugitive lead," he said. "Martin Kane. Last sighting in Greenport. Target potentially involved with Delta K-29. "Thought that case was closed," the agent replied. "It's about to reopen." At Maeve's house, the pups had sensed the tension. Pico refused to sleep away from Freya's side. Ember barked every time someone passed outside. Freya herself hadn't eaten since the man appeared. She paced the house restlessly, inspecting corners, windows, doors. When Maeve tried to sit beside her, Freya rested her head in her lap, something she'd never done before. "She knows," Maeve whispered. She went upstairs and dug through the paperwork Ethan had once left behind, a scan of the chip location, a printed forum thread, and a list of possible identities. At the bottom, highlighted in yellow, was a single phrase. Delta K-29, last confirmed sighting before Bridgeport fire. Status, missing, threat level, unknown. Maeve felt a chill rise through her. Not because she feared Freya, but because she knew now that Freya hadn't just been lost. She'd escaped. Someone had tried to erase her, and now they were back. The moon had risen pale and full, casting a cold glow over Greenport, like the eye of something watching. Maeve sat curled on the floor beside Freya, her fingers gently stroking the dog's fur. Freya had been unusually still since the encounter with the man earlier that week. Less restless, but more withdrawn, like something inside her had shifted. She still ate little and hardly barked, unless one of the pups wandered too far from her reach. Ember and Pico were now sturdy enough to stumble around the living room without falling over every 5 steps, though Ember remained the bolder of the two, often growling at her reflection in the glass of the fireplace screen. Outside, the streetlights buzzed faintly in the hush of midnight snow. Maeve had locked the doors twice, checked the windows, moved Freya's bedding closer to the front of the house. Ethan had stopped by earlier in the day, finally introducing himself formally after weeks of observation. He'd been polite, direct, tall and solid, in a way that made Maeve feel like something immovable had been placed between her and the threat at her door. Ethan wore a long dark coat and steel-toed boots and carried a presence more than a weapon. His jaw was square, lined with gray stubble, and his eyes were those of someone who had seen too much and stored it all behind a locked vault of discipline. He had scanned the scarred area near Freya's flank with a compact handheld device, something military-grade, matte black with a single blinking light. And when the signal blinked red, his voice had dropped. "It's active," he said. "Encrypted. This chip contains logs and tracking data, possibly audio." Then he'd met Maeve's eyes. "It's evidence, enough to bring down more than just Kane." Maeve had nodded, but her throat was tight. Freya wasn't a witness, she was a survivor. That night, as the clock slid past 1 a.m., a gust of wind rattled the upstairs shutters. Freya stood slowly, stiff-legged, ears raised. A low growl rumbled from her chest. Maeve followed her gaze. At first, there was nothing. Then a shadow passed by the front window, quick, purposeful. Freya barked once, sharp and urgent. Maeve's blood ran cold. She snatched her phone, but before she could dial, the sound of breaking glass echoed from the back door. Freya bolted toward the kitchen, snarling. Maeve followed and froze at the doorway. The back window had been shattered. Cold air rushed in with the scent of winter and something else. Sweat, leather, a trace of motor oil. A boot crunched on glass. He was inside. Martin Kane stepped through the broken pane, his shoulders hunched against the cold, gloved hands empty but coiled with tension. His face was shadowed by the hood of his coat, but his voice was unmistakable. "You had your warning," he said flatly. "She's not yours." Freya leapt before he could finish. She hit him full force, snarling, teeth flashing in the dim light. He stumbled backward, crashing into the edge of the kitchen island. Her weight was not what it once had been, but her fury made up for it. Maeve screamed and backed away, clutching a fire poker from beside the stove. Ember and Pico barked wildly from the hallway, their high-pitched yelps like sirens. Kane recovered fast. He drove his elbow into Freya's side, shoving her off. She landed hard against a cabinet, but came back again, teeth bared. Maeve moved between the pups and Kane, the poker raised. And then a crash outside. The front door burst open. Ethan entered first, weapon drawn but held low, followed closely by Officer Reyes, a stocky woman in her early 30s with short-cropped curls and a fierce, no-nonsense scowl. Her badge shone beneath her heavy black jacket as she moved swiftly through the hallway, flashlight sweeping ahead. "Kane!" Ethan's voice rang out like a gunshot. "Freeze!" Kane turned, ready to bolt, but Freya was faster. She lunged again, this time clamping down on his arm. He howled and tried to shake her off, crashing into the table as Ethan closed the distance. A swift kick from Ethan's boot sent Kane reeling into the fridge, and Freya finally released him, panting, blood on her tongue. Reyes moved in and slammed him to the ground with surprising force, zip ties clicking tight around his wrists. Kane's breath came in ragged bursts, eyes wide with fury. "You don't know what she is," he spat. "She's a weapon. You're all just too soft to use her right." "She's not a weapon," Maeve said, her voice shaking. "She's a mother." Freya collapsed beside her pups, blood dripping from a cut near her shoulder. Maeve dropped the poker and rushed to her side, already pulling out the first aid kit she kept on the kitchen shelf. Ethan was there seconds later, helping her apply pressure. "She'll be okay," he said quietly. "It's not deep, just painful." Maeve's hands trembled as she worked, whispering reassurances to Freya between ragged breaths. Ember and Pico crowded close to their mother, licking her snout. Outside, police lights cast blue and red patterns on the snow. Later, after Kane had been taken into custody, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through data retrieved from Freya's chip. Reyes stood by the door, arms crossed, her breath visible in the cold air still seeping through the broken window. "Confirming voice logs," Ethan said. "Kane's command patterns, shipment routes, drop codes. This chip doesn't just implicate him, it links him to the entire handler ring behind the Bridgeport fire." Reyes nodded grimly. "That's enough for the task force to move. It ends tonight." Maeve remained on the floor beside Freya. The dog's breathing had evened out. She was resting now, her body curled protectively around her pups. Maeve didn't move, didn't speak. She simply kept her hand on Freya's fur. "She saved me," Maeve said, more to herself than anyone else. Ethan didn't argue. Before he left, he crouched beside her, his voice low. "We'll get her stitched up properly in the morning. You're both safe now." Maeve met his eyes. "She's not going anywhere." Ethan nodded. "She doesn't need to." The last thing Maeve heard before sleep finally claimed her was the soft sigh of Freya's breath and the steady, rhythmic heartbeat beneath her hand. In the end, it wasn't the chip or the collar or the scars that defined Freya. It was the moment she chose to fight, not just for survival, but for someone else. The first morning after everything, the arrest, the chaos, the long hours of patching wounds both visible and unseen, arrived quiet and clean. The snow had melted into rivulets that ran along the edges of Maeve's street like silvery threads, and for the first time in weeks, sunlight lingered on her windowsill without apology. Inside the house, Freya rested on her side near the fireplace, her ribs rising and falling in a calm rhythm. Her injured shoulder was wrapped neatly in gauze, and her head lay between her paws. Pico was sprawled beside her like a shadow, and Ember sat half on her back, chewing triumphantly on what used to be a slipper. Maeve sat on the floor beside them, still in her oversized sweater and leggings, coffee cooling in her hand. Her hair was pulled back into a loose braid, the ends fraying softly around her cheekbones. She looked tired, but not hollow. There was color in her cheeks now, and when she smiled at the pups wrestling over a squeaky ball, it reached her eyes. Freya had made it through. The cut on her shoulder was healing. Dr. Sarah Patel, who had returned early that morning with more bandages and a soft blue cone Freya refused to wear, had confirmed that the damage was mostly superficial. "She'll be stiff for a while," Sarah had said, brushing snow from her thin coat and kneeling to examine the wound. "But she's built for recovery. Most mothers are." Sarah's own history lingered in the tired curve of her shoulders, the way her hands moved gently, but with a surgeon's certainty. She had once lost a child of her own. Maeve had learned that quietly, through small moments, the way Sarah paused whenever Ember yipped too loud or lingered a few seconds longer over the pups than strictly necessary. Grief, it seemed, had a scent that only others who carried it could recognize. Now, the house no longer echoed like it used to. It pulsed, lived. The floor bore scratch marks, the rugs were never quite straight, and the scent of wet fur had somehow replaced lavender in Maeve's linens, but it was her home again, truly. Later that day, Maeve walked to the community center 3 blocks down, her boots crunching on patches of ice. The building hadn't changed much, still the same navy shutters and cracked sidewalk leading to its glass doors. But as she stood in front of it, she felt her chest swell with something both unfamiliar and ancient: readiness. Inside, the director, a sprightly woman named Darlene Huang, with gray streaks in her black hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, greeted her with a warm smile. Darlene was in her late 50s, dressed in a sunflower yellow cardigan and jeans, and had the grounded kindness of someone who'd weathered storms and still believed in small victories. "You sure?" Darlene asked, eyeing Maeve's application. "I'm ready," Maeve replied. "Just afternoons, reading and writing support." Darlene chuckled. "We've had a 12-year-old trying to write her memoir, a boy who insists his dog is telepathic, and 3 siblings sharing 1 notebook. You'll fit right in." Maeve laughed, genuinely, and something clicked into place. When she returned home, Liam was already waiting on the porch with a bag slung over one shoulder, and an expression that wavered between mischief and awe. He was wearing a navy jacket, jeans, and a knit beanie that barely tamed his messy curls. He held out a slip of paper. "It's official," he said. "Animal Services processed the transfer. You're now the legal guardian of 1 tactical XK9 and 2 fuzzy chaos gremlins." Maeve took the paper, smiling. "You're calling them gremlins now?" "They chewed through the strap of my messenger bag," he said flatly. "They earned it." Together they leashed Freya with a soft brown harness Ethan had delivered earlier that week. It had her new name on the tag: Freya Langley. Maeve clipped smaller red collars on Ember and Pico, adjusting each one gently. The 4 of them walked through Greenport's sleepy streets, past rows of snow-slicked houses and old oaks dusted in ice. Ember barked at a mailbox. Pico chased a leaf. Freya walked slightly ahead, ears alert but relaxed, her posture confident, protective. Beside Maeve, Liam kept pace, occasionally glancing at her when he thought she wasn't looking. They reached the small park at the end of Juniper Lane, a quiet patch of grass and stone benches that overlooked the frozen canal. Maeve let the pups off their leashes, watching them tumble over each other, yipping and growling like miniature wolves. Freya lay nearby, watching with calm vigilance. "You ever think," Liam said softly, "that it would all look like this again?" Maeve shook her head. "I didn't think I'd be anything again." There was a pause. Then Liam reached into his coat and handed her a letter. The paper was thick, folded once, with her name handwritten in clean looping script. She opened it, brow furrowing. It was from Ethan. "Maeve, there are moments in this job where we're trained to stay out of the way, to collect evidence, observe, maintain the line. But watching you open your door to something broken and choosing to heal it, that crossed the line I've spent years guarding. Thank you for not letting the past stop you from saving the future. You gave Delta K 29-something no handler ever did. Peace. She chose her name. You gave her a home. That's how the story should end. Ethan Rowe." Maeve folded the letter slowly, eyes misty, her throat tight with unspoken things. Freya patted over and pressed her head gently against Maeve's hip. The pups clambered around her boots, nipping at each other. Liam reached down and scratched behind Freya's ears. "You're not just a survivor," he said. "You're a pack leader now." Maeve let out a soft laugh, brushing hair from her face. "I think they chose me." The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of pine and city snow. The sun hung low in the sky, the gold catching in Freya's fur, turning her into a statue carved from light and shadow. They stood there for a long time, not needing words, only the warmth of closeness, the joyful chaos of small paws chasing the wind, and the quiet strength of a woman who had once lost everything and learned how to start again. In that moment, there were no scars, only healing. No orders, no serial numbers, just family. Sometimes, God doesn't answer our prayers with thunder or light. Sometimes, He sends us a wounded soul scratching at our door, a mother too tired to cry, 2 babies too small to bark, and a second chance dressed in fur and silence. Maeve wasn't looking for redemption. She wasn't searching for love, or purpose, or healing. But Grace found her anyway. On 4 trembling legs, with eyes full of memory, Grace came, and her name was Freya. This story reminds us that God's miracles don't always come wrapped in perfection. They come messy, cold, shivering, sometimes bleeding, but they come with purpose, with quiet courage, with the power to heal what we thought was lost forever. Just like Freya found Maeve, you too might be someone's answer, someone's shelter, someone's reminder that love still lives in this world. So if your heart has ever been broken, if you've ever felt like the door would never open again, remember, even in the coldest season, God still knocks. All we have to do is answer. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share it with someone who might need to believe again. Comment, "I believe," if you've ever seen a miracle. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story of hope, love, and quiet courage. And may God bless you with gentle strength, with new beginnings, and with a heart always open to the knock at the door.